Hello, everyone. This is Rashmi, your moderator for today's afternoon speaker session from Odisha Design Week. This is Rashmi Rajan, logged in from Mysore in India. A little about me. I have worked in diverse geographies and cultures, including India, Massachusetts, and California in the US, and have traveled across US, Western Europe, and Asia. I have pursued various professions like core IT into systems administration, to having my own interior design firm, and now into UX design. I'm also a World Yoga Alliance recognized yoga instructor, and currently one of the founding members of Solved by Design. I mostly handle project management of UX design projects. So, welcome again. Um, a little introduction about Odisha Design Council. It is a social non-profit organization with a mission to empower local artisans, corporate and policymaker by spreading awareness and education through extensive research and skill training in the field of design. It is set against the backdrop of the culturally captivating state of Odisha in India. And coming to what we are hosting right now and enjoying every bit of it, the Odisha Design Week. It is a brainchild of Odisha Design Council, and it aims to conduct progressive design events and activities that we are seeing right now to promote innovative design and techniques that augment sustainable economic development of the state, which in turn leads to the growth of the national economy. Design lovers can learn and discuss about the applicability of modern design with an array of design professionals from across the globe through workshops, panel discussions, and heritage tours. More or less, like we are witnessing most of it right now. So, all attendees, feel free to use the chat box for any questions regarding the presentations from our speakers, any feedback about the event, or any issues that you're technically facing using AirMeet. It's a very simple and fairly straightforward tool. So, to begin our today's speaker series, I first welcome Mr. George Joseph as our speaker for this afternoon. A quick introduction about George. George is a design director at IDEO.org. I'm sure all designers have heard about it. He's a problem solver and a storyteller at heart. George believes good design empower people to make transformational changes in their lives and their communities, and has solidified this belief working with clients such as the Gates Foundation, St. Jude Children's Hospital, Panama's Ministry of Education, and the government of Singapore. George now lives in Rwanda with his wife, his dog, and one too many bass guitars. So hopefully we'll get to see some of them. I now welcome George Joseph to talk to us about designing digital experiences for the new internet users. Off to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi. Hi, everyone, and so good to see you all on this amazing platform that ODC and Odisha Design Week have put together. It's amazing that we were just talking before this session started about how the pandemic has kind of made things really challenging in many ways, but has also opened up many opportunities like what we're doing right now, the ability to connect designers, people across the world, across different cities, across India, to learn from each other, inspire each other. So yeah, really, really grateful for this experience, and thank you for having me here. Just going to quickly share my screen and then we can get started. Could someone give me a thumbs up or a signal if they can see my screen?
It is visible, George.
Thanks. Great. So today I want to talk to everyone about designing for the next wave of internet users. And so people who are logging onto the internet. So as the first thing, and I can't see any of your faces here, so I just have to trust that you're doing this. But I'd love you to all close your eyes for a second, quick second, and just try to remember the first time you connected to the internet. Do you remember what that experience was like? Try to remember like when that was, what were you doing, why were you logging on, what did that feel like? So I'll just give you a quick moment to just close your eyes and think about that experience. So for me, this is what comes to mind. It was in 1997. This is the first time I had ever logged on to a browser and the web. And for I'm sure there are a few Gen Zs out here who are wondering what this sound is. This is what going online sounded like in the 90s. You know, you had dial-up internet. It took several minutes before you could even connect to anything, and then you had to figure out what you wanted to do. You usually come to a browser landing page, and you're just like, you have options. It's like, do you want to go here? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? It was a different time. It was a very different place. It was a very different time. And in fact, this was kind of what it looked like, right? This was the starter pack of the 1990s computer user, internet user. You had these boxy devices, boxy computers. You had Internet Explorer, and usually it was Yahoo that was your. One second. Sorry. You had Yahoo as your gateway to the web. And all that to say is that I have been using the internet for a majority of my life, for nearly 25 years. And I've grown up and graduated with the evolution of the internet. I've, seen countless web trends over the years. I've seen the birth and death of large tech companies that are currently ruling and sometimes ruining our digital lives. And for me personally, it's hard to think of life without computers or the internet today. Nearly all my work happens using the internet. I spend most of my waking hours just connected digitally, either through work, through social media, through gaming, streaming something on Netflix, or simply just listening to music. And so at this point, I feel like it's an extension of my life and even lifestyle. And I assume that it's the case for most of us here who are on this talk. In fact, we're all connected right now. We're logging in from different parts of the world through different devices. And so I would say a lot of us today might even identify as digital natives. And so a digital native is someone who's grown up under the ubiquitous influence of the internet. You have it all around you, as you have other modern information technology as well. And so your way of interacting with the world is fundamentally different than someone who's never done this before. You think about the world differently. You think about connections differently. You think about access to information and knowledge differently. And this is actually quite different from many people. So even though we're in the 21st century, this is the modern era of technology that we're living in, we have to also recognize that this isn't everyone, right? There's like a large swatches of our population, even in India, that don't currently have access to these technologies, who have never logged onto the internet before. They've never logged onto a browser before. And so I'd love to actually spend today's talk talking about these people, thinking about their challenges and what comes to mind. And so I actually want to tell you a story about Gudia. So Gudia is someone that me and my team had met a couple of years ago. She lives with her family in a small town outside Jaipur in Rajasthan. She has 3 children, spends most of her day tending to them or doing housework. And so when I met her, which was actually at the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic, she had just owned her smartphone. You can see it in her hand. She had just owned her smartphone for around 3 months. And this was the first time that she was ever using anything close to, a smart digital technology. Previously, she's had a radio for a long time. She's had a feature phone before. And so when we asked Gudia, what do you want to do with your smartphone? What do you want to accomplish with it? Why did you get one? And she told us that she wanted to learn things. She dropped out of school after the 8th standard. She never completed her schooling, but she claims that she never lost her sense of curiosity. And so, when she went and bought this secondhand phone from her local mobile shop, the owner, when they were setting up the phone, he showed her how to, use Google. He's like, okay, you click on this thing, you press this, you can click on this little microphone button, and then you can talk into it. India. And so you can see that this was just like, she was like curious to find out some information, and within a matter of seconds she was able to access that information. And so I want to ground us in Guria's context for a moment, because it paints a picture of reality that is actually very different from most of us who are sitting on this call. I'm assuming it's safe to bet that all of us, or most of us, have actually graduated through devices, right, over the course of years, if not decades. A lot of us would have started with personal computers at some point. Some of us may have even started using typewriters back in the day. You've used laptops, you've used iPhones, Blackberries, all sorts of things. Is my voice audible? I'm getting a little message that it might not be clear. Just pause for a second. Can you hear me? Rashmi, is it clear?
Yes, George. We can hear you. There was a little breaking in between, but now it's absolutely fine. Yeah. To me,
Okay,
yes.
thanks. Thank you. Right. And so, a lot of us have graduated the devices, and we probably even own multiple. Like right now, I have a monitor here, I have a laptop, I have an iPhone, I have a tablet lying somewhere. And so we didn't just land up one day with these magical devices in our hands. For someone like Gudia, let me just share my screen again. Sorry about that. And so for someone like Gudia, this is the case. She went from living a very non-digital life to suddenly having a piece of technology in her pocket that has amazing capabilities, and it's connecting her to the world. And so for someone like her, connecting to the internet is equally promising as it is intimidating. It's a huge kind of leap into the unknown. And so just think about this statistic. In the past year alone, more than 200 million people like Gudia have come online for the first time in their lives. 222 million people in 1 year, right? So if you think about that figure for a second, that's about 600,000 people every single day. 6 lakh people coming online for the first time in their lives every single day. Today, tomorrow, the day after that, the day after that. These are people who have never seen internet trends, like I've mentioned, come and go. They've never sat and gone down rabbit holes on YouTube or Wikipedia before for hours on end. Or they don't remember that time when Facebook changed their entire layout and got everyone upset. Like these are things that have no meaning in their lives. And the world that they're stepping into is super advanced. It doesn't resemble, the early internet that some of us might have seen when we were growing up. It doesn't resemble things that felt more experimental or rough around the edges. Today's sites, apps, tools online are really slick. They've been engineered, they've been optimized, they've been over designed. They've been built upon years and years of a priori knowledge, systems, behaviors that have all just evolved over time. And so for a new internet user, you're stepping into a world that is really, really foreign. There's so many patterns to learn. There's so many things that actually just don't make any sense. And this is not just true for someone like Gudia. This is the street vendor outside your house selling groundnuts. I'm sure you've seen lots of people in India now who have QR codes on their little stalls. Or this is a farmer sitting in Nigeria, or this is a moto taxi rider in Jakarta, Indonesia. They're all coming online using their first computers. Like how a lot of us came online with big boxy computers. They're coming online now through smartphones. And so armed with these incredibly powerful devices in their hands, one can enter a place with unparalleled access to knowledge, information, opportunity. But the internet, as we all know, can also be a place which breeds addiction, polarization, radicalization. It can actually be quite negative. And yet, the internet doesn't come with a user manual. There's no guidebook anywhere that's saying, here's how to use it well, here's how to use the different things. It's just, you're in, and you have to figure it out by yourself. And so I think as designers, and I'm guessing a lot of you on the call today are designers, as designers, we shape those experiences. Whether it's intentional or not, we design products, we design services, we design solutions that can spark joy, can spark curiosity, can even lead to addiction. And so I think this is why it's important for designers to think about how do we create these experiences that serve these users in the best ways. And so before I go any further, I'd actually just like to take a quick step back and introduce myself and give a quick introduction. So I'm George. I'm a visual communication designer by training. I currently live in Rwanda in East Africa, in Kigali, the city. And I've worked as a designer, researcher, and storyteller for the past decade across India, Southeast Asia, the US, and now Africa. I've always been fascinated with people and their relationships to the world around them. So I'm currently a design director at ideo.org, which is a nonprofit design and innovation consultancy. And it works to create positive impact for vulnerable populations and communities around the globe. And if you're familiar with IDEO or IDEO.org, or if you're a practicing designer, I'm sure you're well aware of this term. It's called human-centered design. And so this is something at the core of what we do. It's quite literally what it sounds like. It's human-centered design is all about putting people at the center of the design process, making sure that anything that you design is useful, is desirable, and is going to help people in the best way. I think my screen share stopped again. Let me just go back. Not sure why that's happening. So this is true across a lot of the work that I've got to be a part of. People have always been at the center. They've always informed the things that we design and create, whether that's designing for a smallholder farmer in India somewhere, or a high schooler or a group of high schoolers in Latin America, or this single dad and his kid in the US. Understanding the challenges, the aspirations, the goals, the behaviors of people really will help inform how you design solutions for them. So more recently, I've been working over the last 2 years with small and large teams across India and Africa who are building technology products, building apps, building platforms in these rapidly growing markets and environments. And so as new users come onto these platforms, a lot of teams are discovering that people are running into similar challenges, with like using, figuring out, like understanding what to do. And a thread that has cut across all of this work has been this notion of helping people build digital confidence. So, what is digital confidence? What do I mean when I say that? I guess today, if any of us on this call, I would assume most of us on this call, downloads an app, whether we've ever seen it before, whether we've ever used it before, chances are that you will probably be able to figure it out pretty quickly. You can go into the settings, you can customize it, you can, register your account, you can make it work for you basically. You may not need instructions. In fact, you're using your prior experiences using different sorts of websites, different apps, different things that you've used in the past. And you generally have like patterns built into your mind, right? You know that those three horizontal lines is a hamburger menu, and if you click on that, it'll give you more options. You know that this arrow is a back arrow or a front arrow. You also know that you might make a mistake, but it's okay. You can always go back. You can nothing is ever set in stone. And so digital confidence allows the ability for us to navigate through uncharted digital environments with a level of comfort and ease. And as designers, and design can actually support this, right? It can help you build your digital confidence by encouraging you to explore, by giving you kind of like that feedback loop that allows you to explore something with confidence. But we've also seen it can hinder it. You can create an experiences that makes people feel like they're making mistakes, or that if they do something wrong, everything's going to go wrong. Their phone might stop working or they might break. And so it's really important to think of this, right? Especially when you think about smartphones. If you just look how rapidly smartphone access has increased in India alone in the last few years, just with the price of smartphones coming down so rapidly, access to mobile internet becoming so affordable, millions of people have suddenly come online, especially during the pandemic, right? And they're predominantly coming on through applications. They're not coming on like how I was logging on to yahoo.com. They're coming on through apps directly: Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, TikTok, all of these things. And so while many people would claim to be proficient users of their phones, if you ask them, you will actually find that majority of the people are actually limited to using a small handful of apps. It's usually for entertainment or communication, or something that either a friend or family member has shown them how to use. And this is not just a question of urban and rural populations. I'm sure a lot of us have parents, uncles, aunties, grandparents who use smartphones today, but probably just actually use one or two apps on it. WhatsApp, most likely, right? Or YouTube. And they might struggle with things that a lot of us would take for granted. So some of the things that you might hear, say, a new internet user say is, you know, if what if I click on the wrong button? Will my money go somewhere else? Especially when you're talking about digital money, you see things like Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm. There's a level of fear that comes along with making something like that available to you. Sorry, my screen stopped sharing again. I'll share it again.
Yeah, usually it's just a second of a glitch, and then, yeah, you're all
Yeah.
set now. Yeah,
Is the screen share back?
it's getting back, looks like. Yeah, it's,
Anyway, I'll just keep continue talking. I'll wait for it to come
sure.
on.
Yeah.
Another thing you might hear is someone saying, I only use WhatsApp and YouTube by myself. And we heard a lady we spoke to say this. I usually wait for my husband to come home and show me how to use it because I'm scared that if I do something wrong, I might break the phone. It might not end up working. And so these are things that, a lot of new internet users, you'll hear them say, where there's a level of fear associated with using their phones, with using technology in a way that is conducive to them just being able to explore it freely by themselves without the aid of someone else. I'm just going to give a quick second. Is my screen back? I'm finding it hard to screen share again.
It is back. Yeah, it's back.
Okay, great. And so I'd like to highlight a few of the common challenges that you might face when designing digital products and services. So this is clearly not an exhaustive list. There's many more things that you might consider, but these are a couple of things that I've personally found exciting in the research that we've been doing. Just seeing some of the things that are very common. You find them again and again with digital products. So the first one is onboarding. Exploring a new digital product can pose a really high barrier to entry for those who have always relied on friends or family members to teach them how to use something or to troubleshoot any of their problems. So a lot of times a digital product, an app's purpose isn't always clear. Like, why should I use this? What is the value for me? What am I going to get out of it? And a lot of times there's confusing steps before even like being able to log on to something. It's a frustrating set of installation requirements or account registration setups. And so it can lead to a lot of drop off. People are just like, I don't really know if this is something I want to use. I'm getting confused. I'm not sure why I'm using this. And so we see onboarding as a really interesting challenge area to consider. Like, how are people brought on to these products and services? How are they being introduced to them? Another one is navigation. So a lot of the common interaction design paradigms, a lot of the conventions that a lot of us might be used to don't always make sense for users who haven't been exposed to these before, right? There's swiping, pinching, scrolling, tapping, holding, long press. And all of these can feel like simple digital modes of interaction for a lot of us, but they also require introductions. We've come to this recognition after years and years of using our devices. And so like thinking about how are we helping someone navigate through a set of menus, through a set of options, how are we suggesting the right options is also something to think about. I mentioned this earlier, but transactions is the big one. I think making a transaction online is probably one of the most intimidating things you can do for the first time if you're using the internet. You have questions of where will my money go? Will it arrive safely? How will I know if it's reached? What kind of guarantee do I get? What if it gets lost? Who do I contact? And so digital money by itself is honestly quite an abstract idea. Even for me personally, sometimes I struggle to wrap my head around what exactly is happening. How is money going from my phone to someone else's phone? But then finding metaphors that connect it to real world scenarios, real world situations can actually help bridge that gap. I think voice is a really interesting thing to think about. Voice interactions are, in fact, a pretty accessible alternative for users who have lower levels of literacy. So, especially textual literacy, if they struggle with reading and writing. And there are many examples of digital products today that now take advantage of using voice as the primary mode of input. So you actually just search through voice. You get results spoken back to you. You see this a lot with digital assistants, like Alexa and stuff today. And in fact, a lot of the women I met during my research trip to Rajasthan were actually using apps like YouTube primarily through voice search. So they would open YouTube and say, for example, paneer tikka recipe, and they would get a set of videos. They would click on it. They haven't typed a single thing in this entire process. It's very different to how I use something like YouTube. Another one is language, and I think especially in India, with the amount of languages and dialects we have, language options can actually pose a huge barrier to access, especially between switching between languages. And so, if you can't read the options on a menu, when you can't understand what's being shown to you, even simple things like changing your account details, finding a feature that you were looking for, can feel like an insurmountable task. And so you see a lot of products these days that offer the ability to choose a language setting within the app itself. It overrides your system setting, whether you set your language in Hindi or English. You open an app, say like TikTok, ShareChat, all of these apps, they actually, you log on and you can just immediately be like, I actually want to use my app in Kannada or Tamil, and it'll override that setting. By the way, if at any point my screen stops sharing, please let me know, because I can't seem to tell on my end.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is probably you need to reshare it, George. Your voice is fine and clear. Just the screen stopped sharing.
okay, so sorry about that. I'm not sure why that's happening.
Yeah, it's back.
Great. And then another one that is a really interesting one to think about, especially if there's a lot of graphic designers, UI designers in the room, is thinking about the visuals, right? What is the imagery? What is the iconography that you're using? And what is actually making sense to someone who's using the internet for the first time? I think there's a lot of things that we take for granted that don't necessarily always translate to an end user. So what if the imagery is too abstract? What if it's an icon that is not really relevant to me? And as a visual communication designer myself, I'd actually love to just pause on this last point. And if people are online and available to chat, I'd love to ask people. You can type your responses in chat. When you look at these three symbols, what do they stand for? I'll give you a couple of seconds. You can just type your answers in the chat.
Yeah, you can please use the chat window and just respond to George's question.
Does anyone know? Okay, maybe people aren't using the chat that often,
Come on, come
but it's okay.
on.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we have
Got
an
you.
answer.
Search cart voice command, search bar cart and voice. Great. Exactly. You guys are all spot on. You know it, right? This is a magnifying glass. It's for search. The second one is a cart, add to cart, shopping. The third one is a microphone, either to chat or speak or something, right? But I don't think all of us think about people who've never actually used digital technology before. These are actually very abstract icons, right? And so we actually asked a couple of people during, when I was on my research trip, we showed these icons just isolated. We showed them to some people and we're like, what do you think these buttons do? If you click on them, what will happen? And I want to give an example of one woman's response. She saw the first one, and it's going to sound funny, but I don't mean this as a joke. This is just her actual response. She said the first one looked like a frying pan. And so we asked her, okay, what happens when you click on this? She's like, oh, maybe if I click on it, it'll show me recipes. And you see, she saw it on a Google search bar. So she thought, maybe if I click on this, I will suddenly see recipes for dishes that I can make. The second one was a completely abstract shape. She had never seen a shopping cart before. You have to remember, this is a rural area. It's in a place where people shop at either Kirana stores or at mandis. No one is shopping at supermarkets. No one ever seen a cart that you push around and put your groceries in. And so this was just a completely foreign visual that she just didn't understand, like what its purpose was. And the third icon, I mean, it's for a lot of us, it's like, yeah, that's a mic. It's something that you click on and you can speak into. But she had no idea. She thought it was a butta, and she's like, maybe this is for vegetables. And so I'm sharing these examples not to make fun or point fun at anyone, because I think that these are real constraints that people face. These are things that a lot of us will take for granted and be like, oh, I'm designing an app, I'm designing a retail or commerce app. Let me just use a shopping cart icon on the top. but a lot of people might not know what that is, and they might never even click on it because they're just scared that, what if I click on it and it does something wrong. And so it fundamentally then can break the experience that someone is having on a digital product or on a website because they're not sure what these things do. And so I think this is something for us to think about. It's not to say that you shouldn't use these icons, but it's something to think about, and it's something to always double check, research with the audience that you're designing for, whether these are clear or whether there are better metaphors to use, whether there are better symbols to be using. So what can someone actually do? I've talked about a couple of the challenges, some of the common things that come up again and again for new internet users. I'd love to share just some examples of design principles and maybe even a couple of examples of designs that I've seen out in the world that I find interesting, that I think makes, a little bit of a like effort to creating these more seamless experiences for newer users to the internet. So the first one, the first design principle is to let users experience a product. So let users look before they leap, right? It gives them a chance to try before they buy. It gives them a chance to get an experience of a digital product before having to do any long, complex onboarding process, registration, account setup. One of the examples that I love and also hate to use, because just given how addictive this app is actually TikTok. Credit to their success and their growth. I think a huge factor in how they've been able to grow so quickly and around the world. In fact, there's people in remote villages who use TikTok. Is just how simple it is, right? You log on and you're immediately drawn into the experience. It just shows you that, hey, you can just swipe up and then you can consume and be entertained. And so you can go from someone who's never used a smartphone in your life to an active user within a few minutes, right? It's that simple to learn how to use something like this. You can compare this to other products that you might see. For example, like a competitor, I just think about Instagram, for example. Like with Instagram, you have to first set up your account. You have to come up with a username. You have to connect it to an email address or a Facebook account. Then you need to follow a couple of profiles. There's so many steps. And by then, you like lots of people might just drop off because they're just so confused. They're just like, why am I doing this? What is this for? What is the experience actually feeling like? So this is one of those principles where it's like, how do you promote? How do you encourage people to actually try something, learn by doing? Like just go into the experience and experience it for themselves firsthand. Another design principle is to minimize hierarchy. I would say this is true for any design, but especially when thinking about complex products, like say, for example, like this one, it's a payment product. We've all used apps, we've all used sites that have thousands of features, and they're all hidden in some sidebar or some menu, or you like click on some navigation thing and there's like all the options are there. Or sometimes it's like hidden behind something. I think even with iPhones, with Androids, you swipe from the top of your phone and suddenly you're presented with a whole menu of options that you didn't know existed. And so these are all interaction, paradigms and things that aren't very clear to most users who are using something for the first time. And so is there a way to minimize that hierarchy and make things really clear, just make things really upfront? So this example is, like I mentioned, from a payments app from Bangladesh. It's called Bcash. And as soon as you log on, you see these 6 icons, these illustrations, which are also quite localized and clear. And it just shows you, here are the things that you can do. Here are the things that you can do on a platform like this. There are no tiny icons. There are no like menu of lists of options. It's just clear. It's like it's been designed to avoid confusion. And you can see even on the payment screen, the hierarchy is very clear. It's like, here's what you're doing. Here's the person you're sending it to. This is the amount. This is what you do, and then press send. And so how do you create these experiences that are very clear, that are very straightforward, that help people go through an experience without confusion, without having to look in multiple places? Another example, another design principle is to provide timely guidance. So I'd love to just play a quick video. This is from a company called Genie. It's a startup that's based in Bangalore, and they have been working on creating what's called a virtual assistant that sits on top of an application, and it guides people to make choices within an app. So, say you're booking a train ticket, and let me just play the video. It'll help explain this.
ट्रेन बुकिंग में सहायता के लिए यहाँ दबाएं। चढ़ने वाले स्टेशन को चुनने के लिए यहाँ दबाएं। स्टेशन का नाम लिखें और लिस्ट में से चुनें। जहां आपको जाना है, उस स्टेशन को चुनने के लिए यहां दबाएं। स्टेशन का नाम लिखें और लिस्ट में से चुनें।
I'll just skip a little ahead.
कोच की श्रेणी चुनें और फिर यहां दबाएं। यहां से टिकट का कोटा चुन सकते हैं।
So this is just an example of a company that's building what's called this virtual assistant. It's kind of just through AI. It helps someone who's never booked a train ticket on an application. It helps them understand, like where are the options? Where do I click? What happens if I click here? If I need to change my seat, how do I do that? And it's a very like it's a tool that is basically a hand holding tool, right? And it's almost like someone is sitting next to you showing you how to use this. Yes, in an ideal scenario, you will have a real person, friend, family member, mobile dukan owner, like showing you how to do this. But for many people, they don't, right? They buy a smartphone and they're kind of left to their own devices to figure this out. And so this is an example of how you can provide guidance through a product to help people understand where these options are, what the different buttons do, what different icons do.
ट्रेन बुकिंग में सहाय
Another design principle that I love to recommend is to celebrate wins early and often. So an example of a product that does this, which some of you may have seen or even used, is this app called Duolingo. It's a language learning app that uses gamification to help people build their language acquisition confidence. So, as you get more and more into the courses, into the lessons, you kind of see these badges, you kind of see how much your progress you've made. And it helps you understand that, okay, you are making progress. You're like learning things, you're trying new things. It helps you build your own confidence. And I would say that that same principle of celebrating that, like those milestones, celebrating those wins, is something that you can apply to people who are learning how to use a new software, a new tool, right? Celebrating those small wins can encourage people to explore more on their own. It can help them take some leaps. It can help them do things that they might not have felt like they would be able to do before. Another one is embracing local aesthetics. So I think a lot of tech companies today miss the mark when it comes to making their products feel locally relevant. You might see a lot of trends now, on Dribble, on Pinterest, on all the inspiration websites, where apps are starting to look more and more similar. They're starting to look very alike. They're starting to look very clean, very refined, very stripped down, very like minimal. And I would argue that sometimes doing that loses some of that relevance for a user and like their needs. It also like feels like it's kind of like alien. It doesn't feel like it's meant for them. It's not designed for them. And so these two examples are examples that I like to bring up because they're both payment apps. They're not typically the things that you really think about, like how do you make this locally relevant. One is Google Pay and the other one is WeChat Pay from China. And they both reference traditions that a lot of us might be familiar with, right? Things like sending and receiving gifts during Diwali. And they kind of like make this part of the experience. It's like, oh, you can send something, you can receive something, you get like a little token, you get a little diya, stamp, stickers, like all of these things. And for the second example with WeChat, the idea of sending money through red packets, through Hangbaos, I think it's called, during Chinese New Year is a very common tradition in China. So, you usually family members gift money to like children in these red packets. And so as a way to help make that connection, to bridge that connection between what a real world experience feels like and what a digital experience feels like, is to create that kind of like interaction online. It's like, okay, I'm going to send some money in a red packet, and then you see a little animation of this red packet leaving your phone and going to someone else's phone. And I say that because sometimes things like digital money, digital wallets is a very abstract concept. The ability to understand that you're sending virtual currency from your device to someone else's device is a pretty strange thing to wrap your head around. And so drawing these kind of metaphors, drawing these visuals, bringing in these kind of like references is a really great way to help people understand, to help people be more comfortable with what are they actually doing, what is actually happening behind the scenes. And then another one is to offer multiple modes of interaction. We've talked about voice being a great way to kind of like replace typing. And we've seen this a lot with people who have lower textual literacy, who can't read or write or type. There are products like Google Go, for example, where you can speak into your phone and your search results are read back to you. So there's no typing, there's no reading involved at all. And you can see this becoming more and more popular, right? With Siri, Alexa, you have all these virtual assistants where you can literally just be like, how do I get from, Mumbai to Pune via road? And it'll actually give you driving directions, or it'll give you time that it'll take. And you're seeing this more and more where the ability to like just navigate the internet, navigate digital products, just using your voice is actually fastly becoming a way that people are interacting with their devices. So I've shared a bunch of challenges, a lot of design principles, some inspiration, and I wanted to just plug this thing that we had designed 2 years ago. So this is the Digital Confidence Toolkit. A lot of this work, the research that I've been referencing and mentioning, can be accessed at this website. It's called digitalconfidence.design. I'll add that into the chat as well. Feel free to check it out. But this was a project that IDEO did in collaboration with Google and their Next Billion Users team and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we all worked together to kind of do research globally, to pull on research that was already existing, and kind of like put into practice some tools, some research, some inspiration that design teams, designers, individuals, students can use around the world when they are thinking about or actually designing digital products and services, right? And so there's even stuff over here, tools to help you run a design sprint with your team that you can check out. And so I'm coming to the end of my talk. And at this point, if it's not entirely clear, some of you might be wondering, why should we even spend time designing for new internet users? Can't they just learn through willpower? Can't they just learn through time? Like I'm sure over time, if they just use it, they will figure it out. Well, I would argue that designing for people with heightened needs can actually often create a better overall experience for everyone. And I think this is true for many products and services that you might encounter across the world, not just digital ones, right? Even physical things. You might think about redesigning a queuing experience in a bank or an airport, for example, right? And you might think of someone with heightened needs, say someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who's not physically able. And you might design something with their needs in mind that actually helps that ends up benefiting everyone in that queue, right? It actually makes a better overall experience for everyone. And so I'd say the same thing is true for digital experiences, right? When thinking about people who have these more heightened, or sometimes you say extreme needs, and in this case, someone who's never used a smartphone, for a lot of us, is an extreme need, right? We are like used to it, we take it for granted. But I think anyone would actually welcome an experience that was simpler, easier to use, more engaging, less frustrating. And so I would definitely recommend that everyone thinks about, who are the people that we're designing for? What are the needs that are being exhibited? And how can we actually learn from those outliers, as Dan just mentioned as well. And so a question to leave you all with is, how might we actually create these digital experiences that encourage people to discover, to explore, to interact, to transact, to communicate, to play, and to even navigate with confidence? Thanks.
That was kind of an eye-opener presentation, George. I'm sure everybody who listened to you agrees with me. It's awesome, and I think that's a great terminology. Digital confidence, right? It's something that as designers we all have the responsibility to bring that digital confidence to the users. And I'm sure I agree with whenever we design, we all the symbols that we use, we try to bring them as close as possible to their real world counterparts. And the real world is the real world for what we have seen. And like I'm sure there are millions of Gudiyas right there who haven't seen the actual counterparts at all, like you mentioned, the shopping cart, or even I remember somebody mentioning, like somebody saw the real floppy disk, a younger generation kid, a real floppy disk, and said, "Hey, that's like a huge save button there." And I mean, it's realistic what we see and what you just mentioned. So a really good eye opener for designers, how to responsibly design for digital confidence. Anybody, any questions for George? Please feel free to bring it up on the chat box. Either on the chat box, there's also a Q&A tab right there on your AirMeet. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer anything or even go into a little more detail about some of the things that I mentioned, or even talk through other, maybe even challenges that you might be facing or, you've seen in your own work when it comes to this topic. I'm happy to talk through any of that.
Yeah, we are having a great response to George's presentation. It was really inspiring. And I also want to give this information that soon after the session, before George leaves, catch hold of him to, if you have your portfolios that you need expert opinion from George. We have some portfolio reviews going on in the lounge area, so feel free to bring in your portfolios and get opinion from George.
Great.
Okay, we have one comment or a question requesting please put some light in context of human-centered design. And also, how might we make our process a bit more inclusive to begin with? Like some quick tips if you have to share, George.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about the first one, the question around human-centered design.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think a lot of designers actually do quite naturally. I'm sure if you've either studied design or ever done a design process, this is typically part of the way you work. You consider what is the need that you're designing for, and how do you respond to that need, right? I think that is like a fundamental part of both design education and a designer's job and role. I think what you see though in a lot of when you like graduate from college, say, and you start working at a company, is that a lot of people don't come with that kind of background. They don't come with that training. They don't come with that mindset that you need those challenges. A lot of people, and this can be extremely smart people who are like starting up companies, like running companies. You might start from a place of like, oh, this is a technology that I can build, and I'm just going to build this technology and I'm going to like send it out to people and people will use it, right? And I think those are fundamentally different starting points. In one case, you're starting with, okay, like what is a person's actually need? What do they actually need in this case? What do we want to help them accomplish? What are some of their goals that we're trying to get them to do? So, for example, if you're talking about a payments app, right, with like example with like phone pay or gpay, you know that someone needs to send money from one device to another person. And then when you start questioning that, when you start doing research, when you start interviewing people, seeing how they use things like this, you'll start understanding that it's not as simple as just like, oh, I'm just sending money from one device to another. Someone might be like, oh, but how do I know it's gone? Or like, is there, like, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? Or like, what happens if something goes wrong? Or like, there might be fears associated with doing something like that. And so I think what human-centered design as a process really prioritizes is really understanding the needs, the challenges, the goals that people are trying to accomplish, and using that to inspire your design and to inspire either the features or your solution or how you come up with your ideas in direct response to what you're finding, how people are interacting and engaging with it. And to the second question about how do you make your process more inclusive, quick tips. I would say, there's a lot of companies that, might not prioritize doing design research at all and going out and talking to customers, which is a complete constraint and a reality that I'm sure a lot of people who work in startups or even big companies might face. I would say, though, it's not very hard to even get quick feedback. And so usually when we're working with startups is kind of like helping them see and just break down this whole challenge of like, oh my God, we need to run a whole user testing survey and we need to recruit like all sorts of people and get their feedback. And I'm like, okay, if you don't have the resources or the time to do that, you can actually just get very quick feedback. You can find a customer, you can have a quick, phone call discussion with them. You can sit down with them with your phone, show them your mock-up, show them your screens, get really quick input. And I think, that actually doesn't take much time. It doesn't take much investment. And even doing that will give you so many insights, or it'll give you way more insights than you would have if you were just sitting, with your design team in your office or by yourself on your computer. Right. And so I think this is true for student work. This is true for work in startups. This is true for big companies. Like getting feedback on your work is a really important part of the process as well, to make sure that you're on the right track, designing things that are actually useful, designing things that are actually, helpful to people. But then also to make sure that you're testing your assumptions, right? Because I think with a lot of design, you make assumptions about, here's how I imagine people are going to use my product. And so what you're effectively doing by showing it to someone else and testing it is testing those assumptions. Dan, I see your question. You said, these are new considerations above and beyond how we're usually educated. Do you feel that design education is keeping up with the pace of needs? I think yes and no. I think you will definitely see design programs that are, keeping up with the changing landscape of just how like mobile technology has like really changed everyone's lives. And so I think, yeah, some programs are definitely doing that. I definitely think though, and that was actually a huge part of putting out a resource like this into the world. So the Gates Foundation had actually, sponsored this work. And then Google and IDEO decided to like work on this thing, put out all these resources completely for free, that was building on a lot of research and testing and case studies that we had actually done ourselves or seen ourselves. And the idea was just to make this information more accessible, right? It was meant to democratize some of these insights that I think a lot of companies sometimes hold, within the confines of their own boardrooms and own presentations. And the idea was to say that by making this resource accessible, by making it useful from a startup in India, a design team in Nigeria, a student somewhere, I think it will net make digital experiences better for everyone. I think, when you apply these principles, you'll end up creating better experiences. And I think that's the goal that I think a lot of us have.
Great. Thank you so much, George. And also, maybe it will be helpful to all of us if you can, put a website or something where you have all these collaborations, right, with the Gates Foundation and the other collaborations. Is it through IDEO, or do you have a website where we can get these information? That will be
So
insightful also.
yeah, so if you go to the digitalconfidence.design, you will find a lot of that, and there's
Okay.
even a contact form there.
Okay.
And in fact, this program, I mean, there's a lot of different places. Like this program was actually part of a larger kind of stream of work within IDEO called Last Mile Money. And
Okay.
that program was focused on connecting rural, markets to digital financial services. So it actually had a more like financial services bent and focus. But I think the work that came out of this, especially with the digital confidence work, was actually a little broader than that. It wasn't just limited to financial. It could be, entertainment apps. It could be education apps. It could be anything. But yeah, there's also Last Mile Money. In fact, let me just find the website for that, which you can also check out, which is also this Gates Foundation and IDEO collaboration that actually is all about building better digital products for the financial services space. And I will just link that in the chat as well, that you can all check out.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. And if we don't have any more questions for George, it was a great presentation, George, and lots of ideas and lots of insights there, especially with examples like Genie and inputs like how to embrace local aesthetics and things like that. So I think we have one more question from Muskan. Asking, has the pandemic and things moving online and people present remotely affected the research process? It's about what you are doing. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Firstly, I think the pandemic has just accelerated people's use of just apps and the internet so dramatically, right? I think everything kind of like moved online really quickly. And I think India, you've been seeing this trend, not just in the pandemic, but even before, just with like Reliance Geo making internet, mobile data so cheap, I think it's just brought access to many more people.
Yeah.
And then I think once the pandemic came, it just increased that, right? Like suddenly people, you're not able to meet physically anymore, and so you're doing all of these things a lot more often. And so one, I think the pandemic has definitely accelerated adoption. But then I think in terms of a research process, I think it's been really interesting, right? Like, and we briefly touched upon this before the call started, but ideally as a researcher, you want to spend time talking to, meeting the people you're actually designing for, actually being in the field, observing how people use things. That has become really challenging, right? I've been working remotely now for the last 2 years. It's definitely been a challenge to kind of like have that same quality and level of interaction with customers. But at the same time, I think it's opened up many more things, right? And so I've actually found we've been doing lots of research sessions over WhatsApp. I think the format allows for like really interesting modes of communication, because you can kind of like think about your response and answer asynchronously. So for example, I can get on a WhatsApp group with say 10 merchants. If I'm designing a little merchant app um, for small merchants, at Kirana stores, I can get on a group with 10 of these merchants. I can send them concepts via WhatsApp as like images. They can respond to them. They can send voice notes. Then we can have a whole conversation on the thing, which doesn't then require me to be there physically in person. Schedule a time, 1 hour window to chat with them. You can actually do it across the day, over weekends. It actually opens up a lot of flexibility with the research process, which I think is a really interesting side effect of going remote and being in the midst of a pandemic. Of course, there are pros and cons, but hopefully, Muskan, that answers your question.
Absolutely. I'm sure. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, George. And yeah, again, if you need to get your portfolios reviewed, you're welcome on the lounge with George. And again, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of more information from the websites George has mentioned. So we will join back for our next session starting in a few minutes at 3 o'clock sharp. Thanks again, George. We all thank you from my team. Thanks again.
Yeah, I also want to thank everyone, thank the organizers, thank all the volunteers, and thanks all the attendees as well for logging on and joining the session. I really appreciate it, and I'm really honored. Thanks.
Thank you, George. Thank you. See you then. Bye-bye. So spend some time in the booth, the launch area. If you see somebody, waiting for you, can give some tips, for the portfolio reviews and something. Spend 5-10 minutes there, over there. I would request. Okay, George.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.